Hi there and welcome back. Thanks for joining us again. Episode 9 of Ecclesiastes. We are in chapter 9, and here the teacher tackles one of those subjects that is usually not okay at polite dinner parties. What do they say? Never talk about death and taxes. Well, we're not talking about taxes, you guessed it. We're talking about death. So we're going to pick it up at the start of chapter 9 right now. Verse 1 is really intriguing, actually. It's worth just taking a moment on. Chapter 9, verse 1. So I reflected on all this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands. But no one knows whether love or hate awaits them. Now, this is classic Ecclesiastes, because what you have in the first half of verse 1 is a conventional proverb, right? Conventional wisdom. The righteous and the wise and all they do are in God's hands. That sounds right, doesn't it? That sounds like the kind of thing you should read in the Bible. But then, in the same breath, he throws in a counter proverb, almost an anti-proverb. But no one knows whether love or hate awaits them. You see, we can be sure that we're in God's hands, but you can also be sure that you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. It's unsettling. And it's the kind of method that the teacher has been using throughout this book. Of course, as soon as you start to worry with that anti-proverb, what's coming around the corner, you can almost guess where the teacher's going with this, can't you? Verse 2, all share a common destiny. All right? He's talking about the inevitability of death. The righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who offer sacrifices and those who do not. Right, if you've got a worldview, if you've got an approach to life, if you've got a system of thought, if you've got a philosophy that doesn't take into account the reality of death, then it's not worth anything at all. What the teacher does here is he pins down some of the inevitable things that strike us when our minds turn to the common destiny that faces us all. In verse 2, as I've just read, he just reminds us that everybody dies. This is not a problem for rich or poor. This is not a problem depending where you live or what your background is. This is a problem that strikes everybody. Everybody dies. And then in the second half of verse 2, beginning of verse 3, he reminds us that death so often feels unfair. As it is with the good, so with the sinful. But surely that's not right. Surely the righteous and the unrighteous must have some distinction. Well, not when it comes to death. Everybody dies, and yes, that will feel unfair. But then when you get to verses 4 and 6, he reminds us that life is still worth living. Even though death is inevitable, even though it hits us all, even though at times it feels unfair, he doesn't throw up his hands in complete despair and say, well, let's just give in to death. No, verse 4, he says, anyone who is among the living has hope. Even a live dog is better off than a dead lion. You see, he's reminding us that even though death is the constant shadow that hovers in the background of all we do, life is still preferable to death. It's good to be alive. And while you are, then there's something he's got for us. And we're going to get to that in just a moment. But before we do, before we move on to verse 7 and the second half of the chapter, I think it's probably important to point out that when we say the teacher is speaking about death, he's not speaking about death in the way that we're perhaps used to hearing about it. He's not talking about life after death. He's not talking about heaven and hell. He's not talking about it in the eternal sense. He's speaking about death in the sense that it's a reality for all of us right here and now. I mean, I was struck again this week. I did a funeral this week on Wednesday. And as always, it's heartbreaking. There are tears, there's sorrow, there's separation from those we love. And I realised driving home in the car, I don't like doing funerals. I'd prefer if I never had to do another funeral again in my life. But it dawned on me also as I was driving home in the car, is that the sadness that I was a part of on that day gets played out 1,000,000 times over every day around the world. We're shielded from it most of the time. Praise be to God for that. But at the same time, there's a reality here that the teacher sees that he wants us to see. So don't read too much into these verses. They're not to tell us what happens after we die. It's merely establishing the fact and reminding us we live so much in a sanitized world, to remind us that death is all around us. It happens every day. And if it doesn't happen to you or someone you love, it's happening to someone else. And you've got to take that seriously. You've got to take that into account. Well, in verse 7, we hit what is often referred to in the book of Ecclesiastes as these Carpe Diem passages. All right, these seize the day passages. If you remember the great movie Dead Poets Society, they talk about that often. There are numerous Carpe Diem passages, seize the day, seize the moment. We've touched on a few of them before. This is the 5th one as it occurs in the book. In our texting, Facebook, hashtag world, you might be more familiar with them if I call them the Yolo passages. Y-O-L-O, you only live once. Yolo, Carpe Diem. Here it is again from verse 7. Go eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already willed what you do. Always be clothed in white and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife whom you love all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun. You see, here he's saying that because it's better to be alive than dead, then you should seize the moment. You should enjoy the time you have and the people that you have to spend it with. Now, this isn't a blank check for some kind of hedonistic, go crazy and trash a hotel room, get drunk and sleep with whoever you like kind of philosophy to life. Because do you notice here in verse 8, he says, always be clothed in white and anoint your head with oil. Now, I think what he's saying there, being clothed in white, that's image of purity and righteousness. Let that characterize you, right? So don't sin in your YOLO life, in your Carpe Diem moment. Don't sin. Remain pure. Remain righteous. Almost anoint yourself with these things, if you will. But recognize that there are times to be enjoyed, even though death is the shadow that haunts us all. Whatever you do, verse 10, whatever your hands find to do, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead where you are going, there is neither working nor planning, nor knowledge nor wisdom. So these Carpe Diem passages, these YOLO moments, as the teacher puts them, are not the antidote for death. It's not going to reverse death. It's not going to turn death back. It's not the solution for death. But it is how you can live while you wait for the inevitability of death. But he's got a couple of reminders. It wouldn't be the teacher, it wouldn't be Ecclesiastes if there isn't a but wait, there's more. Excuse me. Have a look in verse 11. I've seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favour to the learned, but time and chance happen to all. Remember, in all your planning, in all the moments where you want to live life, the life that God has given you to the fullest, remember this, life is unpredictable and it does not always work out the way you think it will or the way you think it should. The race is not always to the swift, even though you'd expect it would be, nor the battle to the strong. You may be the most qualified, but you won't necessarily always get the job. You might love them with all your heart, but they might choose someone else. And I'm sure you can think of lots of examples in your own experience where that has been true. Moreover, verse 12, no one knows when their hour will come. The fish are caught in a cruel net, birds are taken in a snare. So people are trapped by evil times that fall upon them unexpectedly. Right? Life is unpredictable. Your life will be unpredictable. You never know when the doctor is going to give you the call with that terrible diagnosis. And even though you can't plan for that, you have to be prepared for that. And that's a reality. And the teacher says you're a fool if you live your YOLO moments ignorant of this fact. And then, of course, there's verses 13 to 16. So I saw under the sun this example of wisdom that greatly impressed me. And he goes on to tell a little story. A story about a city that was surrounded and under siege. A great king had come to lay siege to it. And they built siege works, and it looked like it was tickets for this city. But in that city, there was a poor man, but a wise man. And we're not told the backstory, but somehow, through his wisdom, even though he had no stature or standing, he managed to save the city from the siege. They defeated the enemy based on this man's advice. And so the teacher says, yes, that's what I'm talking about. Wisdom is good. Wisdom works. It should be respected and listened to. But, verse 16, although wisdom is better than strength, the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are no longer heeded. You see, wisdom works. It's proved time and time again. But, this is the teacher's point, wisdom is often ignored, even though it shouldn't be. And so you've got to prepare for that too. Life is unexpected and wisdom is often ignored. To our own detriment, of course, but that's the way life works. The life we live under the sun. So as you try to seize these moments with the inevitability of death always in the background, and as you live your YOLO, your Carpe Diem, which is a gift from God, remember these two warnings. Life is unpredictable, and wisdom, although it works, is often ignored. Well, the teacher had it right. The words of the teacher are true and wise, we're told at the end of the book by the narrator. So we can take that to the bank, but the teacher isn't teaching complete. His teaching isn't complete, rather, is it? Because we know there's a lot more to the Bible than just Ecclesiastes. So I want to leave you today with a few verses from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, with the inevitability of death always lurking in the background. It wouldn't be right, it wouldn't be Christian to finish our time together today without turning our minds to Jesus. And listen to these words from 1 Corinthians 15. The Apostle Paul is speaking about the resurrection of Jesus and what that accomplishes. And he says, verse 54, death that haunted the steps of the teacher and indeed haunts our steps too, death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law, but thanks be to God. He gives us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labour in the Lord is not in vain. Amen to that. Well, I look forward to seeing you next time. We're going to be reading ahead into chapter 10. It's one of my favourites, so I look forward to seeing you there.